I suppose I just wanted to share with you very briefly how we're thinking, or one way we're thinking about PIACC in NAL at the moment. And that relates to using a health analogy. And we've been starting to look at it and sort of say, what would this sound like if you were talking to people who don't necessarily understand or have a familiarity with the whole area of adult literacy? And one of the things that we've thought has been kind of useful for us in that regard is comparing it or aligning it sometimes with health. So if you bear with me, we'll see how successful this analogy might be. When myself and colleagues in NALA talk about the work that we do, invariably people understand initially what we mean by that as the 3 R's. And they say, oh, right, are there still people in Ireland who have literacy issues, and does that mean they can't read and write? And whilst I think we've done a considerable amount of work in terms of changing that understanding to an extent, it still remains, I think, when you put the word literacy out into the common public, they will think back to those 3 R's. And apart from the public thinking that, we've often found in our own work that other policymakers or people working in other areas also think of literacy in the same way. So a lot of work that we've been trying to do over the years, and we're very much seeing PIACC as a further opportunity for us to move this awareness forward, is trying to explain what we mean when we say literacy, or how we define it, without necessarily, all due respect to William, without getting a big long definition out there. We need to be able to talk about this in a way that people can commonly understand it. So we do think that PIACC can offer us some opportunities. You just saw in the presentation what it's covering, and that helps people to unpack what's meant by literacy and put it perhaps in an everyday context. So that's one of the things that's very important to us. The second thing is, most of the people we talk to still think that we mean the literacy and the numeracy skills that children attain in school, and therefore if there's a problem around people not having these things, you must go back to the school system, resolve it at the school system, and people are sympathetic that there might be people for whom it didn't work the first time round. So that's another problem that we have always faced when we've talked about literacy in the adult population and brought it into other domains. That there was a sense that most people attain these skills in a very block-type fashion, and they move out of school with them and they get on with their life, and that's the way it happens. PIACC will show us, I believe, that that's not what always happens, and indeed that we not only will lose skills, attain new skills after school, but that there's quite a lot of flexibility. And I think in the description that William was giving, what came into my head was what we call in NALA the spiky profile, that people don't all have the same levels of skills. Now, when you think about that in terms of health, they were giving out to me in work about using this analogy, but everybody's health is an individual thing, so nobody would say everybody has to be the same weight or the same height. And we all already know through awareness campaigns that there are certain standards around weight and height and all of these things to help us understand, are we healthy or are we not as healthy as we should be for our age or our height, or whatever it is. So that complexity about an individual's health is somewhat better understood, I believe, than this area is understood, because people still go back to type where they think about things in terms of schooling, they think about the 3 R's, and that's a really big area that we have to work on to change that more traditional understanding of what literacy is, and indeed, when you get it, if you like. And so we don't talk about health in those ways. We talk about health as something that you have to do throughout your life. But there may be particular moments in your life that your health is a particular issue. And that's what you will perhaps be most motivated to address for you when it happens. So it's just to use that idea in your head as I go through this presentation very quickly. So we're in effect saying one way of looking or thinking about PIACC is that it's like a health check for the skills of a certain cohort of the population in Ireland, those aged between 16 and 65. It's a health check, a moment in time where people went through a very arduous test, I think, and It tells us what are the current skill levels, what in fact might be the skill losses, and indeed what are the skill mismatches. So are people actually have much higher skills than they're deploying in the context of maybe of their work, or much lower skills than they actually need for their work. And we have, I suppose, very clearly set out an objective to bring a certain level of awareness about PIACC and what it means to NALA to three groups of people. Policymakers, we've got some of them represented here today, people who are working in the sector, the providers and the practitioners, and then the general public. And we want, I presume, something like PIACC information to be understood in the terms of other data. So when you say to people in Ireland, actually there's a lot of people in Ireland who don't have upper second level education. People are surprised at that. And they kind of go, gosh, is there? And sometimes when you look at the statistical information that's available around lower education attainment or higher education attainment across the population, some of these results don't appear so shocking. IELTS was seen as very shocking when it came out, but in actual fact we had about half of the adult population in Ireland at the time who didn't have upper second level education. So it wasn't that shocking when you compared attainment levels to their actual skill levels and literacy. Now this survey is going to be a lot more, I suppose, complex than that. It's going to give us a lot more information, but it will actually match again against educational attainment. And Ireland still does have a lot of people who don't have a median attainment in terms of education. And so that's just something to be mindful of going forward. The areas that we're particularly concerned, I suppose, about bringing PIACC and the information of PIACC to, obviously the further education training strategy that Paul has alluded to there will be a key area where we believe the PIACC information should be hugely informative. Ireland has paid a lot of public taxpayer money to do this survey, so we very much hope it's going to be utilised in that regard to inform that key piece of development that's happening. And so we would agree it's very timely in the context of the drawing up of that survey. But also in areas like health. So we have a major population health strategy in Ireland at the moment called Healthy Ireland. Key policy statement in it around health literacy, directly related to this understanding, or the origins of the understanding now that people's health and their ability to manage their health throughout their life will be in some way implicated by their literacy skills. And therefore, if we want people to be healthy in Ireland, we have to make sure that they are able to develop their health literacy skills. Another area, of course, is employment, a big ticket item for government. It's the centre stone of everything at the moment in the media. And Pathways to Work is a huge policy statement around how we're going to support people who are unemployed back into education, training, and invariably jobs. So we would think that this data set will be very important in the context of that policy and the rollout of intro and all the various things that are happening with respect to employment and unemployment. But also a huge amount of people who will be in effect thought through in this survey are actually in employment, probably in very vulnerable employment, possibly the people with low educational attainment that we're referring to. And we're very interested to know how are those kinds of people going to be supported in terms of any developments around support for employment training, for example, or how can employers take this information and use it to support their own employees. The other area I just mentioned very briefly is family. There is a literacy and numeracy strategy for children and young people, and we're working with the Department of Education on that to support parents, because there's now a clear understanding not just that the literacy ability of the parent affects the child, but also that the parent has a very active role to play in the support of children's learning on a day-to-day basis. And we're working with the department to find ways and means by which to support parents. And once again, this survey will actually provide us with the data in respect of how many of these people are parents, how many people are parents who are actively saying in the survey what level of reading and writing they're doing in the home or in support of their children. So it'll be very informative in that regard as well. For providers and practitioners, I've just come up with a couple of small areas that I just thought immediately they'd be really, really useful in the context of curriculum design and development, looking at programs, looking at the content of programs. And one of the things I think there's a lot of interest in is we do a lot of the same programs over and over again. And if there's going to be such radical change in effect from the top all the way down, one would expect that some of that is going to be in relation to content and curriculum and program design. A lot of people are still learning in a face-to-face classroom situation. And there's question marks over, does everybody need to learn that way? Are we behind in respect to providing learning in different ways? And will this survey show that to us, that people are actually open to learning in different ways, for example? So I think there's lots of interesting material for people who are in that space. Assessment just was very interesting when William was noting how, in effect, this is a big assessment in itself. But if you think about it, we talk about assessment in terms of teaching and learning, in particular about what people want to know for a particular purpose. So a lot of people end up maybe getting to know things they don't particularly either want to know or need to know because of the assessment processes they're put through, as opposed to sticking to a learner-centeredness in terms of identifying, well, what do people want to know? Giving them an option of what you might think or somebody thinks they might need to know, and then going from there in terms of content that's delivered to people. And then finally, in terms of professional development, I do think this brings up a whole area of awareness raising for people who are working in this sector and trying to understand. We've just got a very short presentation from somebody who spent 6 years working on this. So you can imagine the dense, complex amount of information that is available there. But if you're actually involved, I think, determining teaching and learning content or working with people who have literacy issues and literacy needs, I think it would be very important for people to get a much more in-depth knowledge of what the survey offers. The final group are the general public, if you like. And it goes back to that notion again that this isn't always about, an identification of a problem and the state stepping in with the solution to it. But often, and certainly in a very restrained expenditure environment that we're in at the moment, this may actually be about what do people need to know about this. So getting back to your health. People are much more aware of their own health and their own choices with regard to their health. And this is one of the things that we think will be useful for PIACC, because people might decide to use it as a skills checker. Can I do those things? Are they important to me? Maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was. What are my options around that? Is that an issue for me in my work? Is that an issue for me with my family? And all of the various things that people here would know motivates people to take up learning opportunities. But sometimes a skills checker idea can be quite useful for people just to think about it and bring it into their consciousness and kind of go, am I thin or am I fat? Am I healthy or am I unhealthy? And this is a way for people to benchmark it, because it's not actually something that they're going to read in depth, but rather want to know, is this something important for me? And then obviously, what can they do about that? What are their options? And certainly we know that a lot of people are able to learn and develop these skills on their own. And often the information that we give out is to say to people, the more you use the proficiency argument that William mentioned, if you're using these skills, or if you're using what you need for you, that's working great. But a lot of people aren't aware of that. So invariably when I give that example of me not being able to speak Irish despite being taught it, people are shocked. Everybody goes, I know exactly, I can't speak Irish either. They've no sense that they might be actually losing any of the other skills that they picked up when they were in primary school, for example, or indeed throughout their schooling. So that kind of information needs to go back out to people so that they can make informed decisions about their own learning, how they want to learn, when they want to learn. And I do think we have a great opportunity with PIACC to do that, to use that as a source of information, both to inform the general public about the importance of these skills in the context of their own healthy skills development. And that sometimes that health analogy is a good way of talking about it, that takes it away maybe from the science, or indeed takes it away from the notion of the 3 Rs. Nobody thinks of their life, their health I should say, as something that is actually addressed when they're in school or in a one-off capacity. They know it's something they have to do throughout their life. And this is another area too. People need to be aware of it. They need to make their own decisions about what they want to do with it. And I think it's incumbent then on us to look at how are we supporting that awareness, and indeed how are we bringing all of the opportunities that are available to bear into their life. So that's just what I wanted to share with you. A little bit about the healthy skills check that we believe this is going to provide to Ireland when the survey results come out, and a way perhaps for people to think and talk about it in the environment that they're going to go back to. Thank you very much.